Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody at GitLab. This is Christopher Lefholtz, and I am running the development group conversation today. The slides are in the section of the document related to today's group conversation. We already have a number of questions, so thank you for the folks who posted questions early. I will try to do answer questions in line as well. So please don't hesitate to help me with that if anybody was willing to jump in and type as I'm responding to further questions associated with this. First question on the list while people are looking through the document is from Marin. And Marin, would you be willing to verbalize your question?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Christopher. Yeah, so velocity over predictability has been one of the important things in this company, and I'm just curious, how does that align with the OKR improve predictability? So which end are we which angle are we taking with this OKR?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I tried to basically say it in there to some effect. The basic there's always a challenge of, do you want to make your organization predictable, or do you want to choose just to move very quickly? And planning is a good example where you want to do just the bare amount of planning to organize work and then get people working on it, right? Like that's the idea is don't spend a lot of time estimating. Do some estimation, but don't spend a lot of time doing that estimation. Get people organized so that people are going to work together effectively, and then just go, right? The one aspect that we have started to see, particularly from a product management perspective, is that we've apparently promised to customers, hey, here's somewhere down the road, 3-4 releases from now, or 4 to 7 releases from now, we'd like this. We're going to have this feature in there, and customers are kind of starting to think in terms of, hey, that feature is going to come up. So when they see those 4 to 7 releases later come up, and that issue or that feature gets pushed out another 4 to 7 releases, that's when they start saying, okay, what are we doing here? So products come with this idea of this planning priority label, which we have started to see items being listed in that fashion. And this is an idea for us basically to say, okay, here's some things that we definitely want to see land and see some focus associated with it. So it's giving the product manager an opportunity to, remind themselves, okay, here's something that I did promise to somebody. And it also gives engineering the opportunity to potentially say, okay, let's focus on, make sure the focus is here. Now, does that mean that it shows up exactly in a certain release? No. Does it mean that we're going to do it for everything? No. So we still have velocity over predictability, and I kind of just used that ratio there of, we want to keep it to maybe 4 to 10 a release, and we have 17 issues, roughly 1,700 issues being closed or released now. How many of those are MRs and productivity versus things just getting closed automatically? That's the thing we got to go dig on, but it still feels like with 2 orders of magnitude difference between those two, we've got some wiggle room there. If we ever see those ratios getting too close to each other, then that's when I would throw up the flag and say, okay, we're actually predictable over, we're choosing predictability over velocity. And that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it from that perspective. So understanding the needs of, hey, we are communicating to customers and they're important to us. We want to, serve them well. And when we say something is, a rough time frame is given, we should try to be in that rough time frame, but also understanding the fact that for majority of our work, we don't want to have that, at least at this point in the company's life cycle. So
is this then the target for this quarter is to measure predictability rather than improving it, or that's the part I'm kind of missing?
Yeah, so good question, and it may be the wording of it needs to be reworked a little bit there. I think what it is at this point is get a process in place around the planning priority, and then based on that, see how we're doing, and then determine it. So improve is, we don't have one right now, so the improvement would be is to actually get something in place, and then whether or not that's super accurate for super accuracy versus just getting into the rough time frame that's to be worked from that perspective. Good question, though. It's not an established process. So, when you don't have an established process, improvement is just getting a process in place.
Everything is improvement, yes. Cool. Thanks, Christopher.
No problem. Okay, and the next question we have is from Sean McGivern. Sean says he's not here, so I'll go ahead and read it, which is also on slide 8. The second key result says, while hiring at current rate, if we fail to hire at current rate, we miss this key result and the first hiring key result. Did we mean to have that dependency between the two? So this is a great example of, did I mean to have the dependency between the two? No, actually, I wouldn't like to have the dependency between the two. However, science says that, both in the data that we've analyzed and also in the results we've seen so far, that just from a time spent perspective, there is a relationship between the two. So I probably need to update that wording to be a little bit crisper, to say, we're going to attempt to hire at this rate, and that obviously affects our ability to deliver. So it's a kind of, the way to think of it is we're going to spend time on hiring. So consequently, we would expect our velocity from an MR per engineer to be lower. When we slow down our hiring, we would expect that to go up, and that's kind of the expectation around it here. So ideally, I wouldn't mean to do this, but that's just the common physics, or law of physics here, or logistics maybe is a better term, not physics, law of logistics here, and we're trying to make sure that we cover it from that perspective. Cool, and then he says, thanks. So 8.3 is due to the hiring drag down the average. Yeah, so that's kind of, okay, good to see you got the explanation. Then the second one was from Sean do we plan to complete 10 times headroom for background job processing this quarter, or get a plan to 10 times a point? So I didn't get to talk to Craig Gomes ahead of time about this, but the goal right now at this point is to actually get that implemented. I'd like to point out, though, that we have been notoriously known for updating our OKRs mid-quarter based on how our results are looking associated with that. So if we find at mid-quarter that only getting a plan in place is going to be feasible, we'll adjust accordingly associated with that. But right now, the goal is very much to get the 10 times headroom into background jobs processing in place. And in fact, Craig has an issue open on that. That Chun's adding to the list, or an epic, I should say, in case folks want to follow that and track that. Cool. Those are the first three questions. Additional questions people want to verbalize?
I guess no one is speaking out, so I'll ask another one, Christopher, if you don't mind. How do you feel? How do you feel about the on-call process that is currently in place for the incident emergencies? How do you feel it has been working out from your perspective?
So there are a number of things to kind of recognize in that. First of all, we put this in place as kind of a global to the group, and we knew that because of that, we may have folks joining calls that maybe don't have as much experience. Part of the idea behind the on-call is to give our developers more exposure to the infrastructure team and what's going on with the infrastructure, to get a better understanding of it. That's not typically how you think about on-calls. Typically what you think about on-calls is this the person you bring in to fix or resolve a problem quickly. Typically, when you get to code changes, they're not going to happen as fast as you would ideally hope. So from an exposure perspective, that's kind of the first intent of this. I actually have been pleasantly surprised in regards to the level of collaboration we had on this. Chundu did a really good job of working hard to come up with a proposal. We had a follow-up Q&A with it. We had alternative proposals which came up, which we effectively, I shouldn't say alternative, but complementary proposals, which we effectively incorporated. So I think that helped a lot to basically address some of the concerns raised by the team, put us in a spot where we can potentially use it. We've only been doing it for a week and a half, so it's a little bit hard to tell early on how effective it is, but it is giving new people, both to the company and also to the process, and exposure to the infrastructure. And from that perspective, I'm pleased just to see that we're seeing some of those. Like as an example, we decided that we were having some issues with a portion of the code we realized that not a lot of people touch. And so we had a group of folks basically go and start investigating it, and they determined that we needed to put in some actual monitoring capabilities in there, or observability capabilities, I should say, not monitoring, but observability capabilities in there. So that's a good example of something that's, it's not a direct causal to speed up infrastructure issues, but I do view it as a positive change for the organization as a whole.
I have just a few observations to add up. Because we just executed for 1.5 weeks, so we need to see some wrinkles there on the execution side. So we are continuously monitoring the situation and doing the work, and you can see a lot of follow-up MRs to the process itself. And we are trying to address the issues as we learn. So this is definitely a learning process. We continuously to improve it. Hopefully that will reach to a point that it works efficiently and effectively.
I've got a question. What's the best place to put feedback? Could you put that in the document?
There is a retro epic, and everything you can, every topic, every feedback, you can initiate an issue and roll in under that epic. I can it's actually shared in our communications. I will find the link for you. I will find the link for now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Darva, that's important that we get that feedback, because the great example was at the Q&A, we got some feedback around making the shift smaller. Which we effectively adjusted to, and we're always looking to improve. So we really appreciate that.
One of the big things I'm kind of hoping to see, if it would be amazing if we could measure how this affects actually developers' way of thinking on building features, because I know back in the day when I was a developer and shifted to infrastructure roles, I realized how my thinking was in some cases flawed, and how it actually affected my development. So I'm kind of fingers crossed here, and hoping that we get that side benefit. And like you mentioned, there was another issue where a bunch of engineers looked into a piece of code they haven't looked before. So that's already a benefit for sure.
Cool. Since that question, I think we've got a good answer on Eric B. Would you be willing to verbalize your question?
Absolutely. Thanks for the deck, Christopher. Appreciate it. So my question is about our plan to increase the amount of maintainers. I know that the code review process in some cases is probably not as efficient as we want it to be, which kind of comes down to maintainer availability. So what's the plan to increase our amount of maintainers to help with increasing the velocity of the code review process? Is there a plan documented, and how's it going?
Yeah, so great question. Couple of points there associated with that. So far, this is going to be probably counterintuitive to a lot of people in the organization. So far, we've been able to maintain a pretty consistent ratio of maintainers to developers. In part, what we did at the start of the year was we started by assigning a particular director within the organization as an OKR for the quarter to make sure that they kept increasing that and attempting to keep the ratio at the same. There has been some debate about whether we should actually have the ratio go lower, meaning the ratio number of maintainers or the number of developers is smaller to the number of maintainers. When we looked over the data of our throughput overall, we didn't see any real dramatic changes based on those ratios, believe it or not. So right now, from a perspective of velocity, it is actually not affecting our velocity. That's not to say that we shouldn't continue to increase it, because at some point it obviously would become a problem. Also, there's both maintainer and developer happiness, which we need to focus on as well. So that's a key important aspect of it. The kind of the way my thinking of it right now is that because we've kept the ratios mostly in check, we've seen that there's a certain amount of lag associated with it when we complete a review and when it actually gets, or when you completed a feature and when it gets reviewed. But in general, that lag is an acceptable amount that isn't affecting our overall productivity. We could optimize it to make it shorter. I don't know if that necessarily draws as much benefit. But that being said, because of the growth, we want to focus on it. It's an OKR this week, this quarter for Bartek Marnin. I think somebody actually posted the issue in there basically associated with that. And the plan is to continue to see those increase and hold our director for the quarter accountable to that. So it's front and center in our minds because we want to keep developer happiness up. But unless somebody gives me a specific example, so far I have yet to see the smoking gun of saying this is a problem from an organizational perspective.
Thanks for the answer.
No problem. So I did stick one pseudo Easter egg in this time around. I don't know if anybody caught it this time around, which I'll share my screen. So I apologize for the smaller size. So if anybody went and looked at the security training link and clicked on that, it sends you to the middle of a document, or it should send you to the middle of a document, which talks about the security training, but isn't actually the security training itself. There's a couple more links below that. But just as a healthy advertisement for everybody, the document is now 82 pages long, and it's our engineering week in review, which talks about everything that's gone on in the week and all sorts of important announcements. And everybody in engineering is required to read it. If you look in the handbook, there's a page around communication that Marin put in, which is excellent from this perspective. And I would like to thank everybody who's started to contribute to this document, because it's brought a lot of things to light. I read it every week to see what's going on, and it really helps from that perspective. So really appreciate everybody adding to the engineering week in review. And if you're a software engineer who hasn't taken the security training, we encourage you to do that as well.
Hey, Christopher, I'll chime in with one more question, just so I could get a little bit more context on this statement. In slide 4, you have a challenge that August is off to a little bit of a slow start, and you've asked the directors to check vacation. Would you expand on what does that mean? What have you actually asked your directors to do in checking vacation?
Yeah, so checking vacation is just understanding the lay of the land. August is a classic month, both in the States and I believe in Europe, where folks are starting to get back to school, and families usually take a week of vacation off. And if you have a disproportionate number of folks taking that week of vacation, then that's an example where you would expect to actually see throughput slow down effectively. So I am seeing lagging and indicator that says throughput for the month is probably going to be a little bit slower. Let's say at the 1800 MR range. That includes dev, which is going to be a 10% reduction in the overall results, FYI. But 1800 versus 2100 that we peaked at in July. So what I asked them specifically to do is go figure out who on your teams have basically taken a week or 2 weeks of vacation in August and add it up. So I'm looking for the gross approximation accuracy. So if every member of the team took a week off in the month of August, then you'd be at 75% capacity, not at 100% capacity. That's just recognizing the fact that people should take time off. We should encourage it where it's needed. Spending time with family is super important to me personally, and also should be important, or at least I view it as important, as making sure that we allot the time associated with it. But that being said, we want to make sure we have a good explanation around it. And this is a good example where it's kind of what we would expect. We're just asking for a quick survey to see if that matches up.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Adding on to that, if you don't mind me jumping in, I'm curious, if that is the case, December will probably have a similar case. Should the targets for those months be adjusted?
Yeah, it's a good question. Typically what we think about when we're thinking about targets is we don't target a specific month and an amount. What we do is target for the quarter and say during the next 3 months, we'll see that. So it's kind of a peak to peak kind of analysis associated with it, or at least that's how it's currently set up associated with that. So the question becomes is, would we ever have a 3-month lull associated with that? And it's conceivable we could do that. We could have a contribute and then November and December, which are classically lower months in the same quarter. So we might have a off Q4 as an example from that perspective. And we probably would want to be predictive in that fashion. But so far in the limited amount of data we have, we've been able to see 1 month where we've gone from peak to peak associated with it. The other aspect is you know, we'll see what the results come back with as far as our vacation time associated with that. And that might not be the only explanation. There might be some other things that we got to kind of dig in associated with it. But, you know, we don't necessarily say, okay, this is our target for next month. We think of it in terms of what's our target for the quarter. And then over the next 3 months, look at how things are going and evaluate it from that perspective.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. It's not a sales target. Maybe is another way to say it from that perspective. All right, I think we've exhausted our question list. So as such, I'm going to close the group conversation. Thank you everybody for attending. Really appreciate everybody joining, and everybody have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your time zone and where you are in your day. Thank you very much.